Hi there. Welcome to this issue of Chickens and Chatter, and I am so excited today to have Sara and Jacob Franklin from Roovolution. Hi guys. How are you?
Hi,
Doing well,
doing
thanks.
great. Thank you
Thanks for
so much for
having us.
having us.
Well, I am very excited. So, tell me, what motivated you to establish Roovolution, and what is Roovolution?
Well, Roovolution is our nonprofit where we attempt to help other rooster keepers have a better relationship with their boys, contrary to the common misconceptions and advice that is given out there. Um, what inspired us really was just the vastly different experience that we wound up having with our boys. Again, completely opposite to what is so commonly suggested on the big groups on Facebook and on YouTube and everything. Um, yeah.
Yeah, because, we started out the same way so many other keepers do. We had just moved from the city. We had bought, a nice little house in a kind of rural community and made friends with our neighbors who had a flock, and our house had a coop. So one evening, we're visiting with them, and I sort of jokingly said to him, we could put chickens in that coop. And not even really being completely serious, we hadn't really even thought it through, but they said, we think incubate some eggs for you. And so we thought, why not? The coop's going to waste. And next thing you know, we find we have 4 little roosters and 2 little hens and not a lot of room, to expand this flock. And of course, you don't realize this until they're, probably at least a couple of months old in most cases. So we're super bonded with them by this point and panicking because it's like, what are we going to do? We can't just send them away. So thankfully, we found the information on bachelor flocks and decided, okay, we're going to give this a try. But then as we're researching, on rooster care, all we're seeing is, they'll turn mean and they'll hate you. They'll hit puberty and they'll pull a 180. And we're thinking this over and going, okay, but if we rehome them, the odds of them being culled are so high. We have to try. We have to try to do it. And we sort of made peace with the fact that we might be getting attacked, by these 4 roosters every day as we tried to tend to them. But at that time, our goal was just to make sure they were safe. So we resolved, we're going to do our best to stay friends with them. We're going to try to prevent that outcome. We, of course, couldn't get on board with any kind of violence. That didn't seem like that was going to work at all. So we just kind of steeled ourselves and we got in there. But what we found is that we did encounter, all of those same kind of bumps in the road that we were hearing talked about. But because we were going into this, assuming that this is a temporary disruption, assuming that this is not actually a flaw in these birds that we'd gotten to know so well, we made it through it every single time. They stayed sweet. So the next question at that point was, of course, we have a bachelor flock, and there are different dynamics between boys without girls and boys with girls. So, we couldn't quite say, this doesn't have to be the outcome for anybody until we had confirmed with enough other mixed flock keepers that those same strategies had proven effective for them as well. So right about that point, we felt pretty convinced that, yes, it is the methods in use that are causing people to have such difficulty, and that doesn't need to be the case. So that's about the time, that we really just felt like someone's got to start putting this out there, on a larger scale and really calling attention to it, because the people who knew, and a lot of people it seemed didn't.
On that note too, and to take it a step further, I guess we had more support in our belief, having come from, a long background of keeping animals. We have still pet snakes and pet parrots, and we've kept other species over the years as well. And you hear a lot of the same things in the reptile community about, defensiveness or aggression, or maybe a lack of an ability to bond. But what we found with our snakes is that as long as you listen to their cues and you respect their natural state and their wants and desires, they can absolutely form a bond with humans. They learn individuals, and they can even seek out affection. A lot of the advice you see in reptile forums is never go close to their face, never handle them in a certain way, but there's never really much of an explanation behind it. And if you tie it to certain things, it's like, well, don't handle your snake when you're about to feed them, when you smell like rat, or something like that. And that's kind of obvious. But if you just separate that from other interactions you have, you don't really have to worry about that danger that they're going to bite you because they might be hungry. Even if they're hungry, if there's not that, smell of rat around, they're not in feeding mode, and they can be completely docile and tame.
They can bond to an incredible level. I mean, I have a ball python who I joke loves kisses on the lips, which I should give a disclaimer here because there's always the concern of salmonella, not just with reptiles, but with chickens too. And, it all comes down to the cleanliness of their habitat. So as long as they're not being exposed to that or sitting in filth, that's really not going to be a concern. We've never had any issues because our snakes all the time, but he'll just come back. He'll just come right up, flicking his tongue, and you go, "Mwah," and he pulls back just a little bit, and he comes right back. Loves to look at the Christmas tree every year.
They're very curious,
They're delightful, So as we were reading all of these warnings, about aggressive roosters and, they're just going to want to fight and they don't like humans. It's like, this all sounds very familiar, so we were kind of primed to approach that with some skepticism because we'd already seen remarkable things from another species that seem to defy the common beliefs. So turns out we can add roosters, right into that group.
Yeah, it's so interesting because what it sounds like, and I think it's, you have like two different outlooks or outviews of things, perspectives, and you have one that people are looking at their animals, whether it's chickens, snakes, whatever, that they expect them to meet standard human thoughts, and so we expect them to basically act like a human, how a human thinks they would. And then you have the other side that looks at the animals, realizing what their natural behavior is and working with that natural behavior to build a bond. Is that kind of how you see things?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Learning to adapt to what they see in the world and their expectations so that we can be sending the right messages to them. Because at the end of the day, all of it really comes down to miscommunication. I actually used to oftentimes relocate wild snakes working at a resort in the desert. And we'd get calls from guests, super concerned about this snake curled up, in front of their door. And these were non-venomous snakes, but our maintenance team at the time was comprised of men who were quite afraid of dealing with snakes. And meanwhile, of course, I was head over heels in love with my boy at home. So I would always volunteer to go up there and help. And I kid you not, I've been on hands and knees pulling wild snakes out from under bushes and never been bitten. Just their intuition is quite incredible, that they're able to really tell where you're coming from and whether you mean them harm or not, whether you're uneasy or not. And that's about the only explanation I have, is just somehow they were able to sense that my concern for their safety was greater than my concern for myself. And you would think they were tame, They were so cool.
That's fascinating. So, that in short, with the mission that you have with Roovolution, has to do with basically teaching people that information. Is that, because it's just,
it's just not as common as it should be,
And it's just
the internet made bad information blow up, unfortunately.
Because when you look online, it's sad, but everything is the dominant theory. You see it, and I think pretty much anybody, and so somebody coming in wouldn't know, which is why, when I pass information on when somebody buys my chicks, that I'm trying to give them kind of a different perspective. And so, having podcasts like this and having discussions, it's really important because people do, they need to realize this other perspective. And, and from everything that you both have done, whether it's snakes or chickens, roosters, that it's great experience that should be passed on. But so as far as what do you offer, any kind of services, or what do you have? What do you do to help spread the word? And if there's somebody with a problem that, could they reach out to you? What resources are there?
Well, we've got our channel on YouTube, the same name, Roovolution. We've got some videos on there that I think are very informative, and some that are just really cute and fun. And we'll try to be better about putting more informational resources on there as time goes. But In addition to that, we offer consultations and email, email correspondence back and forth. We can do a video consultation for free.
Yeah.
And then
Even phone calls. We've had some phone calls, from people that want to speak in real time but don't have access to video. Often rural. But yeah, just really anytime anyone's struggling, we're always there, to help in any way we possibly can. Give some detailed guidance, help dive in and analyze what they're dealing with, and kind of work with them to create a strategy for overcoming it.
Yeah, that's.
And then we've got the book.
We do have a book now. The book is available for purchase through our website, and really designed to be a guide for the people who want to either educate themselves in advance so that they know immediately going into these situations what to do about it, or just kind of like to research and just want to be as well versed as possible in rooster care. So we felt like that would be an important thing, to provide something that a keeper could reference just on a whim whenever needed without actually having to reach out. So we usually say, the consultations are best for if you're dealing with something complicated, the kind of fundamentals haven't worked, because these situations can absolutely be complicated. So when they really need someone to get in there and help at a higher level, that's a perfect option for them. And the book is kind of, let's get set up and let's learn all there is to know about these more general situations that are going to come up and need to be dealt with.
And it kind of maybe attempts to retrain the reader to approach the situation from a different perspective, that we need to account for their natural behaviors and how they're going to perceive our actions and our responses to them. And so it can prepare, a keeper that doesn't have any chickens yet, but it also is a really good tool for somebody who's currently experiencing those issues to be able to troubleshoot them themselves with that new perspective.
Yeah, I know I'm the sort of person that I really don't like to have to rely, on outside help and to feel like I'm not capable of addressing something on my own. So I know there's got to be other people out there that would be much more comfortable, having the answers already than having to try to seek them out later. So yeah, but really, there's a lot of situations, like you mentioned, the way that we're seen and the things that we do. And that's a real stumbling block that I see with keepers a lot, is that it's so easy to go into this feeling like we are owed some form of gratitude, because we're paying the money, to feed and house and protect them. And it does sort of generate, this sense of entitlement, not said in a negative way, but in a way that misleads us, because they are not seeing it the same way that we are. They don't understand what we're giving up to care for them. All they know is that we're a very big creature that is probably at this point in the category of being a natural predator to them. They are prey animals, so they've got all those instincts to overcome. And
in most cases, they're really being forced to live in proximity to us, that thing that they're unsure of.
They've basically been captured, so there's just all of these hurdles to overcome. And then even things like egg collection, the only thing that would ever take eggs from a nest box in nature is a predator. So it makes perfect sense that they'd be very confused if we don't take actions to really demonstrate our aims and that we're safe and all of these things. So yeah, that's a very important shift in perspective too, that they're not being unappreciative. They just really don't know what to make of us at first.
Just to wrap up that question real quick, as far as another resource to give everyone, the group Rooster Allies on Facebook is another really good resource. You can
absolutely
connect with thousands and thousands of other rooster keepers who can share their experiences and what's worked for them.
Yeah,
what I'll do too is add the links in the so when we're finished, so that people will be able to access that. So I will be able to add the links, because it's such it is, because I think too people do have a different, sometimes some people will have a different philosophy, but then they're like the outcast. If you're in the regular mainstream groups and you look at it a little different, everyone's going to tell you, no, you're wrong. You're wrong.
And
you have to
in a mean way.
And you got to do it this way because this is how this is what works. And, and then it perpetuates that, like, dominating, aggressive, act like a chicken. Like, I know, like the list just goes on and on of what people say.
Well, and there's really no great place, to really learn about more compassionate, more effective methods right now, other than Rooster Allies. I was so grateful when the co-founder, had reached out, and she was in a position where she has all of the know-how, of operating a social media group, and I had none. But I was trying to put out all this information, and probably not the most strategic way, honestly. And it was like, well, what if we, get together and we work together on this, and we create, and cooperate this, resource for keepers who want that different method, who are not satisfied with things like the pinning and kicking that are recommended on other pages, and who have seen all of that fail, as they so often do. And so, yeah, these days we have an amazing team of leadership over there, all working together to provide really wonderful information and support. So we're super excited about that.
As a hint, if we're able to put a course together, that would be the most amazing thing, because honestly, I've never seen one. So
no, I don't think
that's certainly on the list. That's on the list of
We've
things.
talked about it a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, that would be amazing, because it just having something and just having it spread out there so people know, and and affordable where people could can access it, because some of the courses people offer outrageous, but
we always prefer a donation model. That's one reason that our consultations are and will always be free and just operating by donation, because we can't stand the idea of anyone being cut off from that help, and what might become of those roosters, if finance is a concern for somebody. And so
one question and I see this a lot too, that when you have a young rooster like going into puberty, or but that line, what are some of the things that, because I see it all the time, oh, my rooster's so sweet, he's so sweet, like, and they drop their guard, and it's not that you have to expect them to be nasty, but I see people going in with shorts or barefoot or something, and that just happens to be the time that their rooster kicks them, and then they get a bad injury, and everyone's like, throw them in the pot, whatever. And and so it's some of these things of just being prepared, not scared, but being informed and being prepared. And what would you suggest? What are some things people could look for? And what do you suggest on that?
Well, I guess first of all, just on the macro side of things, going back to sort of changing perspective and changing expectations. Chickens in general, and obviously roosters are included in that, are viewed so commonly as such a common thing that nobody stops to think about what they could do that could be harmful. It's like not many people think of a dog as being a very dangerous animal, though any dog can be, I guess, technically, right? They can do damage. And a rooster specifically, but chickens in general, I mean, hens can do damage too, but chickens are a very capable animal. They should be viewed as an exotic. Anyone who thinks about interacting with a snake, whether they keep them or not, they understand that there's that potential for harm if they are to do the wrong thing. And if they just applied that to roosters, they'd be so much better off, because they would then see them, oh, that's a beak and it's sharp. Oh, they've got nails and they're sharp, and they've got spurs and those can be sharp. And it's like you add all those things up, and it's just like there's so many opportunities for our fragile little human skin to be broken. But they just expect chickens to be this completely tame and docile domesticated animal, when they're much closer to a wild exotic bird.
Yeah, well, and their interactions with each other are so often rough, and it takes some time. They can learn. We actually have a rooster who knows the command gentle, and if he's thinking of making a grab for something that's interesting him that would hurt, we can just say gentle, and he'll just stop entirely. But it takes them a while, because they're used to interacting with other beings with feathers and cushion, and we don't have it, and that's just not the track they're on at the start.
Yeah. When they scold each other, with a peck to the back of the neck, they're not even hitting skin. It stops at the feathers. But if they communicate with us in a rough way, obviously we're
Oh
far
man.
more fragile.
Yeah. Yeah. My boys just did a curious peck the other day and left quite the little welt right on the back of my hand that was interfering with my mouse movements, and, during work. And he's the sweetest thing. He has no malice in that whatsoever. He's just very strong,
Yeah.
and doesn't always realize it when he's excited. But really with puberty, there's a couple of concerns there, because one is that a great deal of behavior in puberty is completely misinterpreted. Again, because it's rough, it's uncomfortable for us, and therefore we might be inclined to jump to the conclusion that it's mean or that they're being aggressive. One of the most well-known, keepers might not recognize it, but it happens to almost everybody, is the mating bites. When they enter puberty, the first thing they know how to do is, I'm supposed to grab things that move low around me. And for some reason, bare skin is just a massive trigger for this. And we see this consistently across every example we work with. It's always the bare skin. It's usually hands and feet, and hands when you reach low, say to give them treats or to get something off of their toe or anything like that, even to give them belly scritches. Right about 4 months old, 6 months old, that vicinity, that starts being a prompt to mate, and they will respond just almost unconsciously by just grabbing and trying to latch on.
And that's the key there, is it is unconscious. It's automatic. They don't even know they're doing it. Sometimes they'll even look completely shocked and surprised afterwards. They're like, what did I just do? Like, they're snapping out of it.
Yeah.
And what that means is we shouldn't take it personally. All of these reactions they have that might hurt us aren't aimed to hurt us. And so,
they're just kind of guessing, they're revising as they go, because it's their first time having to deal with these adult concerns. It's just a completely different world at that point. And those hormones sort of wake them up to the fact that there can be danger in the world, and that's something that they've not really delved into before. As chicks, it's just, am I warm? Is something hovering above me? Am I scared? If so, I'll run away. But once those hormones kick on, it becomes a fight or flight question. And so many of these situations, they just don't know which the right call is. So they're going to react in the way that is most likely to keep them safe, and then they're going to think about it and revise later. And so much of it is really just impulsive. It's very similar to the kind of automatic response you see from deer. So when a deer runs away in a zigzag pattern, this is designed to sort of baffle the predator who's in pursuit, make them harder to anticipate, harder to secure. But we see the same thing when an oncoming car is approaching them. And it would be so much more effective to go straight off the road, but instead we see them indecisive, trapped in the path of danger. And it's the same kind of switch that flips, where in that moment of panic, they're really not able to analyze. They're not able to strategize and make the more appropriate decision. It's just nature trying to keep them alive in the one way it knows how. So this is one reason we always advise people, don't give any kind of upsetting response in those moments, because when they look back on it, that's just going to affirm to them that there was a danger, there was a problem, and therefore that attack was the correct response. So definitely always important to identify, is this just juvenile confusion and reactivity, just like we might see from a human teenager? Most of the time at that age it is. Even if it is a real attack, though, it's still confusion. It's still a misinterpretation of something that we can work with them to overcome.
Yeah, and going back as well, whether you raised them from chicks or whether you adopted the bird as an adult, it's still never personal. Maybe that adult rooster that you adopted, came from a particular background and had certain experiences that put him on edge. And that's just something you have to get around and prove that you're trustworthy. Whereas, raising from chicks, you're proving that you're trustworthy that whole time before they have that fear and anxiety about the world. And you might run into at puberty those misunderstandings and confusions, but all of them are not personal. Even the rooster that's been abused, when he is defensive to you, it's not personal. You just have to show him that you're trustworthy.
Yeah, that those situations won't repeat. Another mistake that we see a lot of the time with keepers raising roosters from chicks is that well, they'll do one of two things. They'll either be very close with them while they're like in the brooder box or living inside, and then they put them outside into their main run, and it's like, okay, now we're done. Because they're more self-sufficient, they don't need so much constant intervention. But the problem is that relationship still has to remain fresh. It has to be continually reinforced. So if they get distracted and they think, okay, they can kind of handle themselves now, and they distance, then we see a weakening of that relationship, and that defensiveness kind of starts to creep back to the surface. The other thing, of course, is the horrible myth that you shouldn't handle young roosters, which might be one of the most damaging beliefs within the community, truly. Yeah. It's so critical with birds in particular, to bond from an early age if you're going to raise them from babies. It's like bonding is the number one thing, and that requires closeness. To the best that we can identify, the issue with this, the reason that this is believed is because a lot of keepers handle their young roosters, then they encounter the puberty reactivity, and they make the assumption that they've become mean and are like too comfortable with humans, essentially. Yeah. And there's some truth that they are more comfortable with humans than those roosters who are kept at arm's length. But the thing is that because they're not actually trying to attack, keepers do wind up getting more mating bites and things for a short time because that rooster is comfortable interacting with them. But underneath that, they're very trusting. They know that their keeper isn't a danger, and they are not going to launch deliberate attacks against them or try to force them away from the flock. That boy who's kept at a distance might be easy to deal with for a time, but as soon as he works up that courage, he's already convinced that you're not safe, and he's going to come straight in and try to get rid of you the moment he feels bold enough to do so. Yeah. So it's almost exchanging, a very temporary peace for almost guaranteed problems down the road, as opposed to just dealing with a little bit of short-lived turbulence for the reward of a bird who's going to actually accept your presence long-term.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if it's appropriate, but with my roosters, but they get a hard-boiled egg they get in the winter a snack at night before they go to bed because it's really cold. And so I hard boil eggs. And so each one, the flock shares it, but the rooster, it's funny because with the three roosters, they're all different, but yeah, one he comes up and he just has to eat the yolk. He doesn't share with anybody. He's like, no way. And then my other rooster, now he comes up and they know, they walk right up to me. They don't come after me. There's no aggression. They get upset if I don't have an egg. I would expect it. But my other one, he takes bites and he passes it around. He's got a favorite hen, and he calls her over and he holds it and drops it in front of her. And sometimes he takes her. It's funny. He'll take her all the way across. But they respect that. And then my third one, he shares a little bit, but he's also a piggy, and they're jumping up trying to grab it out of my hand. But I use that as a special time, and the girls are right there. So because the way my setup, I can't really get the boys apart from the girls when I need to handle them. So, so I don't know but I've done that since they were very little. All of these I've raised from chicks. I've hatched them and I've handled them, but so that's what I did, and it seemed to work. I don't know if that's something
it's actually a great point. We were just talking about this earlier too. I think maybe one good piece of advice for a mixed flock keeper would be to put their focus on the rooster. And everybody wants the easy friend that the hens provide. It's very easy to pull the hen and call him a friend, but if you really put the work in and the focus on the rooster and gain their trust, the hens will come along with that. They'll see that the rooster trusts you, and they'll trust you even more. Yeah, if you can bond with the rooster, the rest of the flock will follow suit.
Yeah, he'll let them know you're safe. And of course, they're looking to him for guidance all the time, so they'll follow his lead. It's almost like a cheat code, to bonding with the entire flock. Yeah. Get in good with him, and the rest will follow.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That makes me feel good, because intuitively, that's just what I did, because I wanted him comfortable with me going in there and being around the girls, and it's I don't really have a choice, but because I guess there are so many different dynamics, and I don't know. People seem to say like a, I don't know. It's just like people with a million personalities. Roosters, the same thing. I mean, all of my roosters
Absolutely.
are so different, and different things upset them. They're so different, and um,
Yeah, the more you watch them, the more clear it becomes. I say all the time that they're so them, by which I mean that from the day they hatched, so many of these personality traits were already in place and preferences. And, you can just look at their antics today and think back, yep, you are just the way that you've always been.
Yep.
And no two are alike. They do all have their quirks and their preferences and their things they appreciate and things they don't appreciate as much.
Yeah, and they differ, for sure.
yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
So would you say, are there any other misconceptions that people have, especially like new to roosters? That's where but misconceptions that they have about having and raising a rooster. And
Yeah,
Well, I guess that we haven't covered already. I'm not super sure. Yeah, really, the main one is just that potential for friendship. The misconception really is that there's nothing to be had there. Like that a rooster is just instinctual. They're just defensive. They're not going to want to be a friend with a human. But that's just so far from the truth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a rooster's nature, just look to the way he treats his hens.
Yeah.
Roosters are the most loyal, affectionate, wonderful companions you could ever hope to have, to those that they trust and feel comfortable around. So that's the key. That is the clincher right there that decides the way the entire relationship is going to go. Is if you get into that category, everything is beautiful. If you do things to remove you from that category or neglect to demonstrate that friendship, that's where everything really deteriorates.
And if anyone needed, more confirmation of this, it really can be applied to like every species out there, every animal, wild or tame. You can look to any number of videos where the person has taken the time to gain the trust and befriend an animal, whether they're in the wild or not, whether it's some exotic species in the jungle or your backyard chickens.
Yeah.
And all animals, I think it's safe to say, seek first of all survival, and safety, and then once they've accomplished that, they seek comfort, just like we do.
Yeah.
Whether it's I guess wherever they can find it, if they only exist with their own species and they never really interact with another species, they're going to seek comfort with their own kind. But if they live on a daily basis with something else, they would much rather be friends with it than be distrusting of it, be worried about it, have that anxiety.
For sure. Well, I'm looking at even just survival instinct alone, it's kind of encouraging in a way, because there's absolutely no support, for the idea that roosters want to fight, because a fight, especially with something our size, presents a serious risk of injury or even death. Yeah. And they know this, so it's not something they're going to opt into unless they feel like they really do have to. It demonstrates that in that moment, they think that the alternative of not responding is more threatening than that engagement. So, it's very common to hear people say, that roosters attacked them for no reason or that it was unprovoked, but that's just sort of proof that something is going on. He's fearing something enough to risk his life, putting himself in that situation with his keeper. And just the same as they want to avoid that, he does too. We've just got to get him on the same page. And so that's where we can help, kind of address what's going on and pinpoint exactly what the cause is.
And obviously as prey animals, they're always on high alert.
Yeah.
A bird flying over is going to set them off and make them defensive, even though they're not provoked. Like the bird didn't come down and start anything with them, it just flew overhead, but it still put the rooster in that position of having to possibly defend itself or its flock.
Right.
So even what seems to be unprovoked actually had a a cause.
Yeah, and we forget about that a lot, that we don't see everything that goes on in the flock. One example that I've always found absolutely fascinating is that it's been found and proven that chickens dream. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of, having a horrible nightmare and waking up in almost this daze where we just feel threatened or defensive, or, it's like the emotional activation that came with that takes time to dissipate. So we may know logically that nothing actually happened, but we feel like we're not okay. And they can have this too. There's absolutely no reason to believe that they wouldn't if they can dream. He may have dreamt that previous night that his entire flock was annihilated by a predator, and then we walk in and, a new pair of shoes and he just loses it,
Yeah.
So it's so important to account for that, and also just the difference in their physiology and their perception. A lot of keepers don't realize that they actually have specially adapted vision. They have additional cones in their eyes that give them really enhanced color vision, for one, but they also have double cones in their eyes, which give them enhanced motion detection. So this is part of why a hen can spot a bug, 50 feet off, like tearing off after it. But in the same way that she might see that, disruption, way off in the grass and go taking off after it, those little bitty movements in, say, the baggy pants that we're currently wearing look much more dramatic to them. And, that white pair of pants that looks very inoffensive to us might be very, very overwhelming to them. They also can see the UV spectrum. So there's just such a different, perception of things going on.
And like we said earlier too, every bird is different. They all have unique personalities, and what sets them off or triggers them or concerns them could be different. One of our boys has a particular dislike of the color yellow. We don't know why, but yellow is not his friend. But the other boys have no problem with it.
Right.
Yeah, red was a problem. Mine didn't like red. I have one that doesn't like red. So
red is a common one. Anything in the red spectrum, actually, orange, pink.
Well, since we're on this topic, what misconceptions keepers going into it might have, like, you will see that in the big groups, 99% of the people will say red is the problem for roosters. But again, we have to go back to their individuals, and red might be most common, but just keep in mind, like, blue could be the problem color, or green, or yellow, any color.
Neon green for a boy that I'm familiar with.
Yeah,
specifically.
That's funny.
So.
Well, and, I guess that again goes that some people just look at it like there's like, it's like a recipe, and this is this, and this, and you have to stick to it. And that's not with people, animals, or, roosters, that there is, because there are so many, and I guess they forget to put in experiences too, because, it's that nature versus nurture. And I mean, that would definitely be, I did a lot of research on cloning. Like, so we had horses, and there was this great horse I knew, and they cloned the horse. And so there were studies, and I talked to the breeder and then the people that had the clones, and it was funny what characteristics that they passed on. There were certain quirks, but other stuff was completely different, because you can't relive that life. So, I never really thought of it in terms of like with the chickens or the roosters. And but I mean, there would be so, and it would be interesting what exactly gets passed down versus what they learn.
Exactly.
So. Well, genetic aggression is something that we were recently researching too, that is also thought, to be far too simplistic, that if a rooster is mean, he's going to have mean offspring. And of course, he might not even be being mean. The reason he's being mean, might be completely environmental and solvable. It's so hard to even say whether there is a genetic component going on there or not. But even when there is, they've been trying for so long to find a connection, in twin studies and all of these genome-wide surveys, and they still haven't found any, solid or compelling evidence to show that, this is where it's coming from. All they've really been able to say is that there is genetic influence, but there's also a great deal of environmental influence. So yeah, we always warn people against, believing that it's really that simple. We've seen so many supposedly aggressive boys become totally docile and nice in a new home, and so many nice boys, that people say, oh, the person who sold him to me said that he was no problem, but he's kicking me and I tried pinning him. So yeah, definitely the environment and interaction matter.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the misconceptions that really should be mentioned, is the idea of dominance, theory, and, oh, you've got to show him you're the boss. And this, firstly, doesn't demonstrate trustworthiness or friendship, that much is clear. But, people tend to look at rooster interactions, particularly between males, and they notice this pecking order. They notice that the boss gets respect, he gets space, all of these desirable things from a keeper's standpoint. But what they don't see, because so many people don't really keep bachelor flocks, is that
and so
that
many people don't spend hours and hours and hours watching them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, those boys, who lost the fight, they're going to behave themselves for a bit, but, invariably give it 4 or 5 months and there's going to be a shakeup, and those lower boys are going to try to overthrow. It's just a waiting period.
Well, it's also, it's a guessing game too. It could be 4 or 5 months, or it could be 4 or 5 hours, It just depends on the boy.
Yeah, we found that roosters typically expect for that losing boy to continue fleeing, to continue staying away from the group for, anywhere from a week to, I think we've seen them, a couple months. But it's because they know that they might, kind of pretend to throw in the towel, and they're just sort of biding their time. But it's so not the case that the alpha rooster wins and then he's just got everyone's respect for the rest of time. Much more true that he makes himself the target of any other male present, which, keepers really probably don't want to be in that role, because you're going to be public enemy number one the moment they want to leave that flock.
And just a small point there too is, I guess, whether there's multiple boys in a flock or not, even if there's a single rooster and he's got the respect of all the hens, if he does something that one of them really doesn't like, she can speak up. We've seen plenty of examples of hens excuse me, talking back or reacting poorly to his direction, we'll say. He doesn't always get just cooperation carte blanche.
Well, at the end of the day, what it does is it establishes that we're a rival, which is a very, very major cause of attacks and conflict. So we definitely want to avoid that. One really interesting thing along those lines, though, that I think most keepers have no idea about, when you look at endocrinology and you look at the effects that competition has on organisms, there are 2 important concepts in that field. One is the winner effect, which some may be more familiar with. But this is the idea that when a person wins in a contest, or a chicken wins in a contest, there's a chemical response in the brain that encourages them to compete again. So they have found that testosterone production actually increases in that situation to drive that individual to keep pushing to win and win and win again. Similarly, there's a loser effect. The ones who lose frequently become less inclined to fight, more submissive. And so this is actually the scientific explanation for how something like a pecking order forms and comes into play in the first place. But the concerning thing here, because I imagine, keepers might hear this and think, okay, well, as long as I'm winning that fight with my rooster, this shouldn't happen, right? But the problem is that winning isn't actually winning. Winning is defined by doing better than you expected to. So if a runner in a marathon thought he was going to take 6th place and he takes 5th, the winner effect will still occur. And so you ask yourself, in a situation where a rooster is in a fight with a human, what might he be expecting the outcome to be? Very likely death. The fact that he made it out alive could be seen as a win to him.
Wow.
So very, very risky to engage with. Further, winning increases the brain's receptiveness to testosterone. So it makes more of it, and it makes the brain more sensitive to it. And that's how we get into these, really ingrained cycles of aggression and competition, and they seem unbreakable. The key really is not to go there in the first place, and challenge hypothesis essentially essentially says a similar thing, that anytime a challenge is present in an organism's environment, that could be the challenge for mates, the challenge for resources, any of these things, or, you know, an actual confrontation, that the brain also boosts testosterone production so that they'll be more willing to fight for those resources and to protect offspring and to mate and all of these things. So then when you look at dominance theory through that lens, it's very, very clear why this so often fails and why so much of the time those roosters do wind up cold or rehomed because they were, you know, not fixable. But in truth, the interaction itself was actually fueling those problems on a chemical level.
The analogy I like to use is in boxing, or like any competitive sport really that humans take part in. You know, we're all, you know, within a range, close to the same level. You know, the best of the best are at top, and we may be competing to get higher. But if we lose to somebody better than us, we're not going to feel dominated. We might feel that we lost, but we're, again, you know, winner effect. Like we're going to keep competing to do better. Whereas if we were put in a boxing match against some like 30-foot tall giant that doesn't even need to move, and we're just, you know, throwing punches and he's not even flinching, and like that's domination. Like I would have to submit at some point. I'm like, okay, there's no point in me fighting because you're clearly dominating me here.
That's exactly what we're aiming for. We're aiming for them, you know, by non-response, by refusal to engage. We're aiming for them to see, okay, this is a waste of my valuable energy. They're not coming after me. I'm not gaining anything. I'm not going to waste my time anymore. Which is the conclusion, you know, that they will come to. It can take some repetition for them to confirm, you know, because they have to be on the side of caution in those kinds of interactions, but they will get the message eventually that this is not the way that we conduct ourselves together when we're close. So
yeah, I love this because of the like psychology and just all of that, you know, you have, again, the different people with different trains of thought, and some, you know, with dogs and things like that, there are some people who really get into the psychology of dogs, and those are the people that truly care, and they, you know, it's again behaviors that sometimes we can't explain or we can't live with, and we want to help, you know, especially like rescue dogs and things like that. And you know, I don't think the majority of people think of like rooster and chicken psychology. They're just you know, it's like bees. I mean, nobody looks at like bee psychology, and you know, but there are. I mean, I raise bees, and by your attitude when you go to the hive, you're going to either get an aggressive. You could get an aggressive response if you're in that moment of yourself and you're opening and going in the hive. They're going to sense it, and it's, you know, so there's just. If you have chickens and you don't, you know, they're just eggs and you don't care and all that, but nowadays they're pets. I mean, the amount and the stuff, and so you know that, I mean, it's fascinating, and I absolutely I love what you're saying.
Even if somebody has no desire to make them a pet, you know, the psychology is still really helpful in, you know, making chores easier, you know, avoiding that conflict. And like you were saying, just having the right vibe, the right, you know, going in with the right intentions makes a big difference. And something I've noticed too with bees in particular, with wasps and ants, and like the last place we lived, we had all three in a small backyard, and I refused to, you know, deal with them because they, you know, they were there first essentially, and I figured we could test out this theory on multiple different species that way, but it absolutely worked. We had a couple wasp nests that I had to walk by, you know, this close just to get to the chickens on a multiple times per day basis, and ant hills all over the place that I would be basically standing in. Nobody ever bothered me. Haven't been bitten or stung once. And it's I have in the past, but not since you know, not since this realization that if you project that trustworthiness and a desire to do no harm, I think all living creatures sense that, humans included. You know, you can tell when you meet somebody sort of what their mood is, what their intentions are.
like a high or low intensity. We sometimes give this example of thinking of how a predator might, observe or monitor a flock versus how an herbivore nearby grazing would. There's a passive energy, to something that doesn't have any ill will towards the flock. And I think they can feel that. Sometimes it's misinterpreted when we just are very intently watching them out of adoration and interest, but in a natural perspective, that could be a concerning thing. It's like, why are you so interested in me? This might not be good.
Yeah. Continued eye contact, is usually not a good thing in the wild.
Yeah. You can do it once you've really established yourself with them, but when they're still a little bit unsure, it's very easy for it to be misunderstood. And then maybe just one other, very, what shall we say, important misconception to dispel is the idea that they either don't feel pain or that certain processes don't cause them pain. You see a really large trend, within the community of doing things like, bumblefoot surgery, cutting into foot pads, without any kind of topical anesthetic or medical oversight or intervention. You see a lot of the spur removal on boys, which is just, horrendous. And it's depicted as being no big deal because it's easy for us to achieve. Things like twisting off the casing with pliers, which really just exposes that quick underneath, just like if we were to have a fingernail, peeled back. Definitely uncomfortable for them. You can just watch, when they try to roost and things. But the potato method in particular, something I don't think people realize is that the reason that you have to get that potato so hot is because it's literally cooking the connective tissue between the casing and the quick. That's why it slides right off. So a lot of misconceptions going on there.
The reason for the misconception is because when a prey animal is put in a seemingly life-threatening situation, their natural response, if they can't escape, is to just submit, right?
And to check out. It's called like tonic immobility. If you've ever seen those viral videos of chickens being hypnotized, that's what's really going on. Now, I'm not sure why the drawing of a line, it's possible that something is being done preceding that clip to put them into that state, and it's sort of being misrepresented, but it's a well-known effect. And honestly, probably sort of a merciful thing in nature, because they do kind of just check out when they feel like death is imminent. And of course, because they would be targeted by predators if they showed weakness, they have a very, very strong compulsion to suppress any sign that anything's wrong. And we all know this. Everyone always mentions that chickens will hide illness until they absolutely can't anymore. So it only stands to reason that they wouldn't make clear that something's hurting them. You basically have to err on the side of caution that if it's going to hurt a different living being, it probably hurts them too. But you can also look at pupil movements as kind of a guide. Their pupils will very sharply and briefly constrict, either when something really interests or catches them off guard, or when something is uncomfortable. So, some amount of interpretation is needed, because it may just be that it's weird that you're touching that toe and they go, "Oh, what are you doing down there?" But if it recurs every time you touch that other toe and they don't respond that way, and then you touch the initial toe and that shrinks again, that's a pretty darn good sign. The only other one really that's reliable is monitoring heart rate, which would be very hard, for a non-medical professional to do. So we always look to pupil movements to try to assess what their pain scale is.
I'm taking notes too as we talk. So
just before we get off of that topic, I really want to get it out there too, as far as another misconception that ties into the tonic immobility, is that there's so much out there saying that if you have a rooster that's being difficult or aggressive, just put him on his back and he calms down. But it's super dangerous. The chickens don't have a diaphragm to keep their organs from pressing on their air sacs when they're on their back. So basically you're suffocating them when they're on their back. And, maybe if it doesn't go on long enough, they might survive. There would be some level of oxygen deprivation at that point. But the worst case is, they suffocate to death. Which it's really sad, because there's viral videos that make it look so cute and everything, that like they're like a baby on their back, but
and
it's so risky,
because usually the keepers in question don't have any idea why they've become subdued, but it's an attempt to conserve oxygen because they realize that they're low on it. So definitely, yeah, never want to put them on their back for anything, just kind of upright at worst. But it's basically about remembering, that those organs are going to rest, wherever gravity puts them. Their air sacs are all along their spine with their organs down in their belly. So as long as that's not being inverted, they're pretty all right. You also see the recommendation to hang chickens upside down when they're misbehaving, which is so incredibly dangerous because, similar to not having diaphragm, they have no sphincter to close off their crop. So any fluids that are in there are going to just come right back out. We've all probably seen our hens in particular drink a bunch of water, lean over and dribble out, a bunch of spit up. They can't actually vomit, but those crop contents can absolutely be essentially regurgitated against their will. So the concern here is that if they have this fluid coming out of their beak and then they're righted, they can very easily aspirate, which is either going to lead to pneumonia if you're lucky, or just be near instantaneously fatal if you're not. Same thing with vomiting them for sauerkraut treatment. It's an equal risk of that kind of thing happening. So yeah, very, very different physiology, than we're used to.
Because I would not put any of mine on their back, but I know it's a big thing. People talk like chicks because it never fails. Somebody's holding a chick in their hand and they have it on their back, and they're like, "Oh, look how cute! It's like resting," but and then everybody yells at them, But I don't think people realize that or even look at it. That that same method of that problem and outcome is going to apply whether it's a full-grown hen or rooster too. So that's good. I just would never do it, but I didn't realize, the exact effect of it. It's just something that,
most people don't.
Yeah. Well, we have such a conditioning, to see that as a comfortable, cozy, reassuring position is how we hold our babies, so it's going to be a natural go-to.
Or cats or dogs, they like
so
it too.
So many things that don't have that same concern. But you will note, when chickens are dust bathing or sunning, they're maybe on their side, but they're never completely on their back unless something's wrong. So definitely a position they avoid.
Yeah, I've never seen one dust bather or the sun on their back. So I mean, maybe a dog. That reminds me that it's a horrible. I drove to California once, and going through Texas, I saw a cow on its back with its legs sticking straight up. And I tell you what, it was in a big field, and that is my only association with Texas. I haven't been to Texas.
Oh, no.
It's horrible. And I mean, and that happened 1999, so it's a long time ago, and it just stuck with me. And it was just and the cow was by itself. The rest of the herd must have gone somewhere. And my kids saw it. We were driving, and they're pointing it out, like, look at that cow. And and so but so sorry, it's kind of a deviation, but it's just
another thing that most people don't know. I mean, before I learned about it, I would have had no idea. I would have thought, oh, that cow's really enjoying itself laying in the sun, but it's dangerous for cows to be on their back. They get bloated and
turtles also same kind of issue as chickens. Actually, they'll suffocate if you breathe on their back. So it's just fascinating and also kind of heart-wrenching and terrifying, when you start seeing all of these different things, that can be dangerous for them that we might not naturally account for. So
I mean, there's just so much to learn, and at the same time, there is, but it isn't. I mean, it's so funny because people are like, chickens are the easiest if you're gonna, homestead and do all that. And for the most part, I mean, my great grandmother, I have a video with my grandmother and my uncle. And I mean, this is from the 20s, and it's a hysterical video of, I mean, there were chickens everywhere. That's, and they were very, very poor. And she had the chickens, they ate them, and they got the eggs. So, I mean, and there was no special care or, any of that. And actually, my husband, his father, he had 5,000 chickens. So he sold eggs, and this was, a long time ago, but the eggs were like a nickel a piece. But he had huge barns, and, they lived in the barns, and they, and when my husband's grandmother, when they wanted a chicken for dinner, she'd go out and they'd grab a chicken, and but there was no special, but I
Yeah.
mean, they weren't really, they weren't free, they didn't free range, but they lived like in a barn. So
Gotcha.
Right. Well,
but
and it's interesting to think about too, because that was so much more common, of a thing back then. And I was just thinking, how would they feel, seeing the, house chickens like we have now, and just how much that's changed in the silkies and these fancy breeds, and how much they've become a companion animal. But, it calls up too that so much of the guidance that's still being used within the community grew from that period. So
yeah.
we're basically applying methods from keepers who that was the extent of their goal, to have eggs. They lived in the barn. You'd grab one when you needed dinner. That was the extent of the relationship.
And it literally was very close to an actual like survival situation.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
things weren't easy back then, like they are today.
The goals were very different, than they are for a lot of, urban and backyard keepers who do want to make friends with the flock and be closely involved with them. Those big time farmers were not going out and sitting with their rooster and bringing treats, like it was an efficient, strategic decision. So we always encourage people to think of that too, that, whatever method you're using, it's so important to make sure that it aligns with your goals and was developed by people who shared them. And in so many cases, that is really not what's going on. So you've got people trying to make friends with their rooster using these methods, from people who had no interest in doing that whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a logistics problem that we face a lot too.
Yeah.
So if somebody does have, say, what they term an aggressive or a rooster, and see, I hate to use the word aggressive because I don't really look at it. It's not really aggressive, but I don't know. Maybe you'd have a better term because I don't like that word. Whenever I write about something, I try to keep aggressive out because it's not. I don't see it. It's more protective. Okay, that's
protective,
that's
defensive.
Yeah.
We use reactive a lot. I mean, ultimately, it's usually fearful. At the root of it, it's fearful in some way.
And confusion, like.
Yeah.
So what would be some strategies or something that, and I know we've talked like a little bit throughout, but for somebody that was, their rooster reacts to them in a certain way that, that it's fearful of them. So what would be some good steps for a person to take so that they can kind of, have the right attitude and not make it worse by their responses? So what would you recommend in those situations?
Well, I guess start slow, like literally, in your movements, in like when you're doing your chores, and especially when you're around the rooster. Be consistent with your routine so they know when to expect you and what to expect from you. But I guess maybe most importantly is really respect his comfort zone, when, and that some of that's going to require a little bit more observation than maybe most people initially do, but look to his cues. When he starts appearing a little bit more agitated or concerned, then just back off. Maybe chores have to get pushed, to a different time of day that day, or skipped maybe even that day. Maybe the chores are going to take longer than they usually do, but it will very quickly communicate to him that you are respecting his boundaries, respecting those anxieties that he has, and you're not trying to push it.
Yeah, an example we've given on that note before is to sort of consider how you would feel in two different situations. One is that a stranger arrives at your house and they knock on the door and they patiently wait for you to open it. And maybe they're selling something you're interested in. So you say, hey, go ahead and come on in, after a short discussion, versus a stranger arriving at your house, flinging the door open and storming straight to the back of it. Any of us are going to feel like we're in danger in the latter situation, even though we haven't been harmed. Nothing really horrendous has happened, but it's that intrusion. It's that obvious lack of respect and care that makes us feel like you might hurt us because you obviously aren't concerned about our comfort. And the same thing applies to roosters. So, you know, taking it slow, greeting them when you arrive, giving them a little bit of time to adjust and invite you, you know, into the flock can be extremely helpful. As far as facing actual attacks, you know, when a rooster is actively responding defensively to his keeper, we always recommend doing nothing at first. And the reason for this is because there's such a danger of acting incorrectly and convincing him even more that there's a problem. So until we know what's causing it, until we know what he's responding to, the safest response really is no response.
And when we say that, that doesn't mean you have to let yourself be, you know, injured repeatedly. There are ways we can do nothing that also keep us safe. You know, I think that starts with always wearing, you know, long pants of some kind, jeans preferably, you know, thicker jeans, closed-toed shoes, long sleeve, especially if they're in puberty, long sleeves and gloves
can help,
really help. But protecting yourself from that initial impact or potential scratch or cut. And then beyond that, you know, you can use a simple barrier, just a kind of shield that you can place in between you and the rooster that's about to kick you. It's not going to be used to hit them back or push them back at all. It's going to remain, you know, stationary, and it's just something for them to let that energy out on.
Yeah, to do what they feel they need to, without
and so
it
you can show,
problems.
so you can do what you need to, which is show them you don't respond to that in a negative way.
Exactly.
They can kick you as much as they want, and you're not going to kick back, which proves to them you're not a threat.
Exactly. And, you know, a lot of people worry, you know, you see a lot advise don't run away because that'll convince them that they're in charge, right? And it's all, you know, it all comes back down to the pecking order that people sort of mistakenly assume they have to be a part of, you know. And I've kind of taken a joking, like, your rooster knows you're not a chicken. He really does.
Yeah.
The only reason he's going to treat you like one is if you try to act like one. So just don't do that. You can be an outside friend of the flock. You don't have to be part of that social structure or rule hierarchy at all. But obviously, you know, everyone is going to encounter a first time that a kick happens. And, you know, if you have to make a choice between kicking back or fleeing, flee. Every time. It might embolden him a little bit. He might get that, you know, success of, I ran them off, I took care of it. But it's only one time. And now you know, and now you can come back, you know, with your protective measures in place so that you can start working with him and showing him, hey, this is not a big deal. You're fine. Of course, the steps of this process are always going to be to put your focus first on observing. So you've got your shield. You don't have to respond in any dramatic way. You can just kind of stand calmly. But then you want to be looking, you know, to what's going on. What was I just doing? What was I just carrying? Where are his hens? What are they doing currently? Where is he looking on my body? Is he targeting my feet or trying to? Is he trying to target up high? Is he pecking? Is he kicking? All of this is important. And then you can take that information and go back and, you know, really start to analyze, okay, what might be actually happening here? Because just making a guess, just throwing out kind of a Band-Aid fix, like, oh, I'll just stick him in a kennel, you know, is never going to actually solve the problem. The crucial thing is to identify why he's ill at ease in the first place. From there, we can identify a solution. So we always recommend, you know, when keepers are seeing something like this, you know, if they don't immediately know what might have set it off or what they need to do about it, we're always here, you know, to help dive in there and figure out what's going on.
And maybe just to add to that a little bit, you know, on top of trying to do nothing and not respond negatively, going in with a sense of calm and confidence really helps a lot. Like we were talking earlier, you know, if you project that sort of friendship in your actions, they'll pick up on that too. But on a more, you know, tangible physical side of things, like, while they can do damage, they can break our skin. It hurts. You know, they've given me so many bruises, you know, so many times. But it really is just that. Like, you're not they're not animals that are going to like murder you, right? The worst that's going to happen is a tiny little flesh wound. And if you compare that to other animals that we're so familiar with and accepting of, like cats bite their keepers all the time, like in play, dogs as well, right? Parrots can do some really big damage with their beaks. But we immediately forgive those species and don't take it personally, and we treat the wound and we're past it. But if we could just apply that, we'd have a little less fear of the attack in the first place. So like protect yourself, armor up, wear proper clothing, have a shield, but don't be afraid of the attack, because even if they miss the shield and they contact your arm or something, it's really not going to be that bad.
Yeah. Well, and in fairness, there is just one case on record where a woman did, or a man, I can't actually remember, an older individual did die following a rooster attack. What's very often omitted when people recount this story is that they were alone, they had no phone, ways away from the house, and they had a bleeding disorder. So they had varicose veins. So this is not something that's likely to be replicated. And I might motion that if a person does have a bleeding disorder, a rooster is probably not the best choice of animal to keep.
Chickens in general.
Chickens in general.
I mean, we have a particular hen who is, I think, high anxiety, and she struggles with, communicating the best way. And sometimes she's rough, and she's broken the skin just as many times as the roosters have.
She has. Well, and another thing that's important is maintaining spurs, so a lot of this really comes down to taking reasonable precautions in advance, not waiting for that attack to happen. A rooster with properly trimmed spurs, and this would be done very much like trimming dog nails or cat nails. You're just taking off just the tip, being careful not to cut through the quick, and just smoothing a Dremel, an emery board.
Well, on that note, if you've raised them from chicks and you're currently bonded, maybe even before puberty, if you got into the habit of, just taking like an emery board to that area, to that little nub before it's even a spur, and got them used to that, and
Just
you would
the
never even
sensation.
have to clip them at all. You could just keep them dull with an emery board.
I used to just sort of rub my thumb on their spur nubs when they were younger.
That's great to know.
That like they'll need to be okay with this contact at some point, so that it wouldn't be so weird.
No, that is really, really good and important, because I was going to ask. So with my roosters, I have, they're still young, so their spurs are little. I mean, they're all like a year old, but I mean, so it was something, and I have, as you mentioned, people doing. I've seen some horrible, again, things. So, and that's something I've never, even though, I mean, I've held them a lot. I can pick them all up. They stay away. I mean, they stay away. Like, they come up to me. They're not particularly happy about being picked up. And they have to get picked up when we get tested for the NPIP, and they get their blood test. So that is when I pick them up. But and I can, because basically when I need to, I have learned, I don't want to chase them. I don't. So if I need to do something with the boys in the morning, I have nice gloves, because sometimes they will bite, but I get them off the roost bar in the coop in the morning. And that for me is the best way, because then, and I leave the girls in until I'm done with the boys. So he doesn't get upset that his girls are running around and, he's not with
that
them.
works perfect.
But, because originally, I was trying to catch, I had to do something with him. I think he had a small cut, and there was something, it was bleeding, and chasing him was, and he did not want to get caught. And I knew that was like it's like a predator chasing after him. And that's how I saw it. So I learned, and that's how, I do it. So I guess that's something, though, I should start doing is, just like at least checking the spurs and touching.
Yeah, for sure. Once they get kind of long and to the point that they might be getting sharp, I would start in with just the gentle, regular filing. Okay. You don't want to do it when they're too tiny, because kind of the best way to picture it is that quick is going to gain more distance from the spur tip as it grows. So when they're
Okay.
just nubs, that quick is very, very close to the surface. But over time,
It's
that
gonna,
distance will develop.
like a dog's nail, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
similarly to a dog's nail, actually, I believe this applies with them as well, that the quick can recede. So this is really useful for people who have roosters whose spurs are already very overgrown, or who are taking in boys with very overgrown spurs that need to be trimmed. Since that quick extends too, we get into the situation where you can't take it down to a healthy length, at least not all in one go. But the quick is sensitive to its distance from the tip of the spur, and as that adjusts, it's going to shrink back accordingly. So you do about, maybe a quarter, maybe half an inch trim each week or so. Give it about a week.
Okay.
The quick will recede. Do another trim of the same amount. Give it a week until you've worked them back to where they need to be, and that will prevent, any pain, any bleeding. If you're lucky, you can shine a light through the spur and actually see where the quick is. We've never had much success with our boys.
Yeah,
It's more
that's
visible
tough.
on some than others.
I think it extends maybe a little bit further than what you can actually see with a light through it. But also on that note, real quick too, in case there's anybody listening that does have a rooster with overgrown spurs and you're going to go to trim them, I would not recommend like the typical dog nail trimmers. There's a lot of people that recommend those. They are big enough to get around the spur, but almost everyone, even the ones that the vets use, they're just too flimsy. Both the handles and the blades, they're not thick enough. And what we found works really well, I guess, if you have assistance and can stabilize the leg. But cable cutters, they're for cutting metal cables. Get them at any hardware store. They've got like these rounded sort of blades, so when they come together, it I don't know how to describe that, but it works really well on the spurs. And if you just do a quick cut, it goes right through.
Yeah, much
and then
less
you can just
crushing
file.
risk, and much easier, with the hand strength, because you're not having to fight against that spring that the dog clippers have.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, it works very, very well.
No, that's good.
But also,
Yeah,
as
that's
you're
really good.
cooking, as you're taking them down, you can also tell if you're getting close to the quick, because you'll start to see a very light pink, slightly shiny dot right in the middle.
Pointy.
If you see that, stop. That's close enough that time. And further, you're probably going to wind up with a bleed. And those can be a little bit difficult to stop too once they start. So,
No, that's good to know. Yeah, none of my roosters have ever had big spurs. So, but I've seen some like really big ones. So
yeah.
No, that's good to know.
And depending on their environment too, toenails, beaks, and spurs, all three things grow continuously, but in nature they're kept reasonable through different processes, whether they've got things to scratch on or things to peck at, keeps the beak shorter, and depending on what they're roosting on, it might help keep those spurs short or allow them to grow. But
oh, that's good to know. Yeah, I have a hen with like curly toes that and so I have to cut her toenails because I was like looking, I'm like, oh my goodness, and I realized
we have a lazy one who just seems not to dig very much.
Yeah.
We have one who's always just perfectly manicured. Her nails just stay so short, but the other, it's like she looks like a little witch if we let it go at all.
Yeah.
So, different temperaments.
So so in talking about like challenges and things, so some people feel like if they have a rooster that they have considered a problem, and and they're torn about rehoming it, and so some people will just say, I mean, that they just want to call it and eat it, or refrigerate, whatever, freezer camp. I don't know. They have all the different words and stuff that they use, and they feel like that's the only option. And
they feel usually like it's the only responsible option. There's and it's very well meaning. They feel like if I'm afraid that this rooster is going to injure me, then he may injure someone else. And if he does, I let him out of my care and someone gets hurt, it's on me. The problem with that is, again, so many of these issues are the product of interaction, flock configuration, environment,
misunderstanding.
So all of these things will change in a new home. Whether they'll change positively or negatively is up in the air, but they will change. So there's absolutely no reason to expect that behavior or that issue will survive that transition. That rooster may be perfectly at ease in that new location. It kind of depends on who he goes to, which is the next important point, that as long as the person taking him in knows his background, as long as you're forthcoming with them and you say, hey, I've been struggling to get him to stop attacking me. He seems to be very defensive of his coop and his flock. I've had no success, in dealing with this, or I don't have the time to work with him, or whatever the case may be. In most cases, it can be resolved and the boys can stay at their original home and be peaceful. But, there are people who they do not have the setup. They're just not equipped to do what's going to be necessary to fix it. But in those cases, it really is up to that other, adult keeper to decide if they want to take on that risk, because so many like us would be thrilled to take that boy in and work with him. And we are not the least bit phased about the fact that he might have attacked in the past, or even if he continues,
But that's part of the vetting process too. If you are concerned for the bird and you'd rather not cull them, and rehoming is the only option, but you don't want the new keeper to cull them, you got to be very picky about who they go to. I think as time goes on, more and more and more and more people are seeing this new side of roosters, and they're willing to take in boys. But one thing I would say to anybody who is, feeling they need to rehome their boy that they care about, check out the person's property, check out, how they care for their other birds. It'll be pretty obvious if they're going to be, a good caretaker and keep your boy safe, or if they just intend to cull him and get a free meal out of it.
And ask too about their background with roosters, whether they've kept them before, whether they've dealt with any kind of aggression and how they resolved it, if so. Because if they say, oh yeah, I don't keep aggressive roosters, and my roosters that I've trained, I've just pinned them. The ones that it doesn't work on, they go, and the other ones stick around, again, you're going to know. So yeah, definitely we always encourage keepers to ask, essentially, if you do run into problems, because any animal can have a bad day, any animal can be feeling frightened, how do you respond in that situation, and what is your strategy? And when bringing in boys, actually, too, when adopting new boys, we always encourage keepers to ask a lot of questions. How were they raised? Do they have a history of attacks? What have any past traumatic experiences been? Have they encountered any predator attacks? Because the more of a complete, essentially, mental health history and medical history that you can get, the better equipped you're going to be not to send the wrong signals, to support them in the way they need, and just to have an all-around smoother and better transition.
And anybody that you're looking to rehome your boy to, who isn't okay with you asking all of these questions, that's a red flag. Anybody who's going to take good care of them will be more than happy to answer all of these questions.
They may even volunteer the information. But any defensiveness or anything weird like that, then probably just go ahead and get out. And worst case, we always advocate for making them a house rooster.
Because I breed some, and I always do have some extra roosters, and so I will give them, usually I tell people I'm going to charge them first off, so I know, but then I don't end up, I give them the money back, but I always, if I can't see physically their place, I get pictures and I talk with them, and I get pictures of their hens and stuff, because I have had a few people try to trick me where they were going to eat them, and it's kind of a close community, so I do know some of the other chicken people around here, and if I post something, if somebody responds, they'll say, oh no, he's collecting roosters, this is like the sixth one he said I'll take, so they know. And again, and I mean, I love all my roosters, and mostly I end up with the Pita Pintas, and I love the Pita Pintas. They're very sweet boys, and
Yeah.
I wish I could keep them all. Well, my husband does
Yep.
not like the crowing. Okay,
Aw.
my neighbor does not like the crowing either, and so
That brings up a really good point. I don't know if that this really fits into any of the questions we had, but as far as preparation for anybody going into this, if you're starting with chicks, first of all, and you're expecting to get all hens, like, good luck. You're likely going to end up with a rooster or more.
yes,
But even if you go into it knowing you have a rooster or multiple roosters, even in a semi-urban environment, like, the crowing doesn't have to be a deal breaker, and it doesn't have to be the cause of like conflict with your neighbors. We had really good success, not sound proofing, but sound reducing their coop and their
Yeah.
enclosure. There are ways you can design it and soundproof it that the overnight crowing or the very early morning crowing is not audible at all, even from like the street, just 20, 30 feet away.
Email us if you need guidance.
Yeah.
It's a little bit weird, and it would depend on the coop itself, the exact details, but yeah, it can absolutely be done. And remember, crowing is communication. So often when boys are crowing excessively, it's actually sort of a notification that there's something wrong. Maybe it's a predator coming around every night if they're crowing, after sunset.
yeah, they don't really.
They've fallen off the roost.
They fall off the roost
when my husband starts talking, they start crowing. And he's like, I don't live on a farm. I said, yes, you do. But
every time we're on the phone, ours do the same.
On the phone, they've gotten better about it since living inside. Actually, it seems to be less unfamiliar to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, back in the day, it was like we couldn't figure out exactly whether it was that they can hear that other person on the phone who's a stranger, and they're kind of letting them know this is my space, or whether they just were confused by the fact that we're talking but not to them, and they don't see anyone else there.
That set one of my roosters off was and that was one of his times where he was very unhappy with me because I was on the phone and it was on speaker because I was doing things outside, and and he didn't kick me, but he came running, like he was very, very upset.
What's going
and
on?
It was
here?
because of a strange voice, like on the speaker.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's got to be scary because they hear an unfamiliar person, but they can't get vision.
They don't
on
see
them
him
anywhere. And
Yeah.
if you're a prey animal that's so reliant on identifying visually what threats might be around, that would be very upsetting. So it makes me think of how roosters hate camouflage shoes in particular. You hear all the time about camouflage Crocs setting off roosters, and you take a step back and you think about this, and it's like, well, here we have a pattern that's meant to blend in with the ground, and now they're moving towards him. Like, what more unnatural situation could you be faced with? That's a nightmare for a chicken, so
but I did I made nice with my neighbors. My boys, they stay in until 8:00. Well, 7:30. I'm going to try it because I looked on our town bylaws too. And so there is no ordinances or anything against roosters. There's a noise ordinance, but 7:30 is fine. And I put a decibel measure thing on my phone so I could, and I mean, they can, but I went across the street to see how far. And I do the runs. I leave the side facing the street with a tarp, like on that side. So it blocks. And
that helps a lot. Yeah.
There's a little bit from the coop, but it's not that loud. Because see, before I was putting them out really early, and it's these neighbors complain about everything. I mean, everything. The dogs on the street, everything. And the wife had just retired, and I woke her up. My rooster woke her up. So she did not like the fact that my rooster woke her up, and so
she just needs to cuddle one for a few minutes.
Exactly.
I tried, but they weren't very. They don't even. I tried to even give them eggs. No, they didn't even want eggs. So, but everybody else loves it. I mean, I live in a farm town, so it's everybody else loves it, and I give them eggs to keep the neighbors happy and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the crowing was, and
Yeah.
it is something when people buy my straight run chicks too, which is why I give them your resources. But I always tell people to be prepared. Like, if you
Right.
can't keep a rooster, have a plan. Don't wait until the last
Yeah.
minute, because then, and if you love, if you love your chicks, and the people who buy from me, they're pets. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I do they are very socialized and like used to being snuggled and hugged and spoiled. So, and so you get attached, and you don't just,
Yeah, it's
just
hard.
throw them out someplace. And yeah, you see people dumping them, and because there's a lot of like town forest and stuff, and
Yeah.
and the roosters, they dump one of my friends she lives more in a city, but a rooster wandered up onto her porch and was like sitting on the rail like of her apartment, and
Oh,
she
Man.
left it there for about like half hour, and then it was cold, and she said she brought
Yeah.
it in. She's never had chickens, doesn't know anything, and here's this rooster sitting on her porch, and she just picked it right up. And I mean,
oh,
somebody dumped it for some
Yeah.
reason, brought it in
Weird.
the house, and she fixed like a little diaper for it in a crate. And I
nice.
mean, I don't know if she still has
He knew
Yeah.
she was the one to go to.
Yeah, I mean,
Help him, yeah.
like, so
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
it's
That's
funny.
cool.
people think that that's compassionate, in some way to release them into the wild, but it's like, man, they're so far removed, from wild existence. And people look to places like Hawaii or Florida, where they do live wild, in wild populations. And it's just such a night and day difference, the climate and the, I don't know, just the availability of food sources and the existence of natural predators or lack thereof. Like Hawaii has virtually none. But
Yeah,
so
in Key
many of us,
West,
like,
I
we don't
mean,
live somewhere like
when I was in Key West, I was completely, it was like the first exposure when I saw like the roosters everywhere. I mean,
Oh,
there
man.
could be
so cool.
a restaurant like in an outdoor, and there's roosters like
Yeah,
at
yeah.
your table.
There was a moment there where we considered moving out there just
Oh
for
yeah.
that.
Well, we talked
Well,
about
it was
Key
in
West,
Georgia,
and there's
right?
there's a little town in
Yeah.
Georgia where the roosters are like protected. It's like a town violation to accost them in any way. You're not allowed to chase them out of your yard or anything
They
like
get the
this.
right of way on the road.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah, they're just like the center point of that town. And
Yeah, so
of
cool.
course, the problem would have been the complication of getting our birds, all the way to another state. The
Yeah, that's
4 hours we drove, to our new property was chaotic enough for everybody, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
but okay. So as far as your, I know you had mentioned your ebook, and we did talk a little bit about this. Um, so right now you don't have any kind of like workshops or anything, but you did mention consultation. So what resources do you have that, and I know we did kind of go over that. We have the Facebook Rooster Allies,
Mhm.
and then the consultation. But what, what, cut, because I think, I mean, no, I think I'm going down the order of questions, but I think pretty
Yeah.
much
we pretty much did cover all
we
of
did
that. Yeah.
touch that.
I'm just scanning my notes. Like, is there anything in there that we didn't talk about?
Well,
But-
okay, so let's go to the future plan. We'll go to the future plans.
And we can tie in, because some of those educational efforts are future plans. So
Okay.
So we'll just kind
that'll,
of
that'll
go
fit
to
in
that.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so here we go again. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you envision the future for rooster advocacy and your plans of for Roovolution and what you're doing?
Well, I mean, in the the broad sense, long term, we'd really like to reach as many people as possible and just change that that perception or that expectation that they have for roosters, and that's going to come down to creating more resources that suit the individual, because everybody learns a little bit different way, and some people prefer the podcasts or videos or books or actual courses and workshops, and we'd really like to do all of it. It's just a matter of getting ourselves organized and generating the content in a organized way, but where it will be ultimately is either on the channel, the YouTube channel, or on our website, roovolution.org. You can get the book there, and but when we do any sort of courses or workshops, those will be there as well.
For sure. And we're also working on adding, sort of a frequently asked questions, resources. I've considered even making almost an automated kind of flow chart for help with diagnostics, that people could work through to just kind of get a general idea of what they might be dealing with and what some possible things to try would be. So yeah, we're always brainstorming how we can make that information more accessible and what would be most appreciated by the people who are needing help. So, any suggestions, throw them our way, email us, let us know what you'd like to see and what would be helpful for you.
Yeah.
And as far as the future of rooster advocacy, yeah, we've seen such a wonderful shift in sentiment already, with more and more pet keepers entering the hobby and more of them seeing just what amazing relationships they can have with these birds. Just that passion is really through the roof. And we're constantly meeting, new people who want to jump in and who want to help share that information themselves and, really bring about a better world, I think, for all of us. None of us really want to fight. And the roosters especially, just are so grateful when you do get in there and establish that friendship. So I think more and more, we're going to see those kind of outdated dominant style methods fall even further out of favor. They've already been replaced for other species, honestly, with positive reinforcement training. Horses, dogs, the dominance training is really not favored anymore. We're lagging a little behind, in the rooster community. Yeah. And it's not that what we're continuing to do, on a large scale actually does work well. It's just that there's, kind of been a delay in getting those new methods out there. And so we think it's just going to keep growing, and we think that people are going to be absolutely blown away by what they're able to achieve with those better methods.
Yep.
It's exciting. I mean, it really, as you were talking, it reminded me just of having like some kind of rooster ambassadors. What I was actually thinking is, how they have like the flat, like dolls. I don't know what that flat little doll that they take around and they send around and do pictures, that it would be so cool to have like a flat rooster. But even a kid's book, something, and have the flat rooster with it, and you could send pictures, like put it in different places on an airplane, and because no, just in brainstorming though with kids, that if you start with kids and and having like a children's book or something too, that they're going to start to grow up with that new philosophy versus the the older people that unfortunately have that backwards look at the way that they do it. But that's an
excellent point and an excellent suggestion, because the issues we face today is because of that. So many livestock keepers who don't view the chickens as a potential companion animal grew up hearing that chickens are just dumb, simple-minded, automatons that are just there to produce eggs. It was really like, I don't know if this is a word, propagandized back in the day, like in war times when, everybody needed to be a little bit more self-sufficient, and they were raising chickens and goats and cows and everything. And it was just for productivity and survival. And in order to make that easier for everybody, we had to, remove that potential for a relationship.
Yeah.
So that's what everybody learned, growing up.
Well, and it really is true. You see what you expect to see and you find what you look for, so it's just this domino effect, of people not thinking there's going to be anything noteworthy about their chickens and kind of going into it a little bit blind. And we did too, we never in a million years thought that we were going to have a deep friendship with any of our birds. We figured we have a coop, chickens lay eggs, we use eggs. We're animal people. We have friendships with snakes. We've had tarantulas in the past. We have a chinchilla at present. So it's astonishing that could have been even a little bit lost on us at the time. But still, our expectations were so much lower than they should have been. We're just absolutely blessed that we were able to, spend the time necessary to kind of open our eyes to that. and have since learned. You hear them called stupid a lot, like you mentioned, which just blows my mind, because there's an absolute scientific consensus at this point that they're at least as smart as a 4-year-old human. It's important to clarify, when we say smart, we don't mean that they're identical in their brain to a 4-year-old human. We mean more that the capabilities that they have and the problems they're able to solve in their day-to-day life are on par with the level of problems that a 4-year-old human could also solve. So we're talking things like deductive reasoning and inference and all of this. But the fascinating thing is they've fairly recently, a new study where they were found to be capable of transitive inference, which in humans doesn't develop until about age 7. So, these are brilliant animals. They've been found capable of taking the perspective of another being. So for instance, if a hawk is flying overhead, you'll find that a rooster, when he's hiding in a bush, will make a louder alarm call for a longer duration than if he's exposed, showing that he is able to understand that the perception of that other being is going to be influenced by whether he's undercover or not. So he's doing this risk analysis, in real time based on their observations of him. And they've also done a recent study that was very fun, where they have at least suggested, maybe not proven just yet, but they have pretty compelling evidence that roosters recognize themselves, and chickens, I'm sure, in general as well. But they did this by modifying the mirror test, the infamous mirror test that's been used on primates. But the fun thing is that instead of putting a mark on their face to see if they try to wipe it off, because chickens don't care if there's a mark on their face, what they did is they set up a mirror and they observed roosters' alarm calls. Because the thing about roosters is they understand that alarm calls might draw bad attention to them and could endanger them. So they won't do these when there are no flock members present to protect. They'll only do it when they have others around. And what they found was that when there was a real rooster on the other side of this barrier, the rooster would alert as normal. But when given only his reflection and no other real birds in the room, he fell silent. So very compelling evidence, that they do understand that that bird is them. So we're just so excited all the time to be reading these new studies and see, what more there is to learn here, because we've really only scratched the surface on how remarkable they are. And I'm certain that we're going to be blown away in the years to come.
We certainly are not a, certified research endeavor. But yeah, our experience with our birds is they are capable of so much more than we've even begun to realize.
I have to share the anecdote because it left both of our jaws on the floor. But our boys, back when they were in their run, they were going through another pecking order change up. And we had our cameras on them. We were working from home, so we would watch them pretty much all day, every day on the security monitors. One way we were able to get so much information about their behavior and observation. But this particular day, they had been fighting somewhat regularly out in the run. We'd been having to run out and break it up. And we had been running out basically the moment that they got into it. And we were pretty close to their run. So, we were quick to get out there. But at some point we decided, are we intervening too quickly? Maybe they would settle this. Maybe they would sort this out if we held back just a little bit. They're being reasonable. They're not hurting each other. So we resolved, the next time that we see a fight break out, we're going to hold back just a second. We'll watch, we'll be ready to run out, but we'll just see how they do. And what we saw was that they approached each other. One of them kicked, the other kicked, and then they turned and ran side by side in sync to the fence of the run and stood there completely peacefully watching the door for us to come out. Yeah. And I think my initial response was, bad boys. Somehow they had made the connection, that when they fight, it brings us to them. But not only that, they had somehow coordinated a deception to achieve this goal, which would have required communication. They had to be on the same page. They had to decide when to execute. I mean, still absolutely astonished by that.
They really are smart. That is, and I have to admit, it makes me really mad when I hear people call them stupid, because it's again, ignorance. But it's very frustrating because I will defend them and then, then they call me stupid too. But I'm
Just
like,
link them to studies.
yeah. So
Usually works.
where do you find your studies? Like, if I was, what do you just do random searches? Like, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, sort of. So, if I'm wanting to know, heritability of aggression, that's going to be something that hasn't been very extensively studied in chickens. The studies that exist actually found much more of a link to things closer to anxiety or depression, a difficulty in processing dopamine and serotonin, actually, and only in one particular breed that they were looking into. But usually I start by searching for, just the topic chicken studies. Always look for, the .pub, the hosting archive type sites that give the entirety of the study rather than just a summary or an excerpt, because those will very often be taken out of context. So if you're up for, looking over the study itself in detail and seeing, is this compelling? Was it designed well? That can definitely be helpful. But then if you don't find anything in the chicken realm, it's also very interesting to look into any studies in humans, because so often, these brain chemistry type things are very, very similar. And they're also sometimes used even to sort of model things in humans that we can't as easily observe. So there's actually quite a lot of interplay there.
Just to add to that as well, there is an in-between, I suppose. Not all studies have been done on chickens, that have been done on humans, but a lot of studies have been done on other pet animals, that are maybe closer related to chickens than humans. Parrots is a great example, that have been pets for so long, and there's so many studies on the intelligence and physiology of parrots. They're obviously going to be comparable in some areas, maybe not all of them, but and then reptiles, another pretty common pet animal that isn't necessarily widely accepted as super intelligent or emotional, but studies have been done on them. So if you're looking for like medical information, or some psychological studies as well, but
there's
look
a
to
lot
other
of
species and take it with a grain of salt. See what similarities there are that you can apply from that study, because brain chemistry is brain chemistry. If a brain produces this chemical or is affected by this chemical, and they're studying the reaction or the response to it, that can be applied to a lot of other species that also generate that chemical.
Well, and that's the thing, a frustrating thing is that there are limited studies on the really fascinating topics when it comes to chicken keeping right now. But the exciting thing is that means that we're all kind of at the forefront of this research, through our own observations and the connections, that we're able to make. So a lot of what we're doing comes down to, looking for what's been found in other species, what's been found in psychology in general, what are the common themes among different species. And when we look at and evaluate our own chickens' behavior and do some testing of our own, can we confirm or reject any of these similarities? Do we see evidence for them? So, it's definitely a process of refinement and kind of trial and error and honing in, on which things are relevant. But that is really the start of how those patterns are first identified and eventually proven. So yeah, I, for one, am super excited to be in a position, to be potentially discovering, new things about what they're capable of just through the engagement we have with our flocks.
Just to
tell me
double
who you
back
have.
a little bit here, I have to say, one of the things that I'd really like a future plan to be is to actually be a part of a legitimate study. I would love to have our boys be documented and observed and learned from in a more legitimate way. That we can only expect people to believe so much just based off of our videos and our personal experience. If we could partner with some real scientists, some real researchers, and they could give us the proper tests to do and various things the right way to document it, then we could actually produce something that people could maybe a little more easily trust. And that would be cool. I would love that to be a future plan.
Well, and I'm quite sure,
Yeah,
at least on one front, I'm quite sure that we have enough evidence within our flocks to confirm that a chicken's language is adaptive. Now, we don't have the tools and we don't have the laboratory and the reproducibility, right now to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. But we have so many examples where they've taken essentially natural behaviors that would have a different meaning by default and adapted them specifically to communicate things to us. Actually, one of those examples is right here. This is Miss Lotus, and something that she has learned how to do is to dig at our leg with either her foot or her beak to ask to be held, but also to dig against a shoulder to tell us to put our arm around her. So for her, that beak drag has basically become, I want a thing. So in nature, that might be, I'm going to beak drag to try to unearth something good or tasty. But now she's using it to unearth affection. She's using it to unearth, safe spot in my hair. She actually beak dragged up my bun the other day to try to ask me to put my hair down for her. And as soon as I did, she nuzzled right in there, with her little face. But she's not the only one. Her sister, who's no longer with us, Sunshine, is actually the one who taught her that. Sunshine also used to tidbit every time that we came into the house. When she was sick, she was living indoors with us for some additional care. And we would have to put her in her kennel when we went out to visit the boys each day so that she didn't need supervision. And so every time that we came back in and it was time to come out of the kennel and she saw me come around that corner of the bedroom, she would start tidbitting, no treats present. And we have a girl even now who does the same thing. As soon as we enter the room after being away for a short time, she'll tidbit over absolutely nothing. And it's just a happy greeting, We have a boy who the sound means either go for it or come here, because he would make that sound right before jumping onto my lap when he was younger. And so, it's a thing that, just they have such potential to do. And you always see people ask about, what does this sound mean? Or what does this behavior mean? And they get the technically correct, response, but nobody really seems to be considering that these really special personal meanings develop over the course of a keeper's relationship with their flock.
It's a lot like cats, how they'll develop sounds and use sounds they wouldn't use with other cats just for their humans.
Like meowing. Meowing is not a natural sound for cats. They don't use that with each other in the wild, but they will with humans. And they even speculate that it might be meant to imitate the sound of a human baby crying. So manipulative, just like the chickens who will fake tidbit.
So how much have you found that they've taught each other, so because that could even apply to like a rooster, that if you have a younger rooster with an older one, what the behaviors that they learn from each other, it's like a mother hen with its baby.
They will definitely learn those patterns. And it seems to be modified by how close they are to that other flock member. For instance, she and Sunshine were very, very close friends. So she seems to imitate quite a lot of her behavior. Sunshine was the first one to stand on a lap and hug chest to chest. That wasn't really a thing until her, except in the boys' flock, but the girls had no exposure to this. So it developed independently in their flock. But then she took to doing the same. And we would do what we call double hugs, where they both be on the lap, one on each shoulder with their chin, and they love that. So the dragging the foot and beak, she learned from her. But now it almost seems like she might be teaching the front hugs, as we call them, to her sister Midnight, who is not incredibly good friends with her. They get along just fine, but they're not super close. However, she gets all these special hugs, and Midnight sees this, and Midnight has a tendency to be a little bit jealous. So I can't help but wonder if she's not observing, she's getting something nice by doing that, I'm going to try doing it too. Because she's been making early attempts, to kind of get into that position and nuzzle up a shoulder. And she's always been one to plop down on the lap. So, the situation is still in development. We definitely
Is that a special room that that you're in right now?
It's our bedroom. It's their bedroom too.
Okay.
Yeah, the boys actually sleep in that tent behind us. They've got a roost there. I'm
Okay.
currently in the process of building a coop in our large bathroom where the girls currently sleep. And so the new coop will house them both.
Yeah.
But
What
yeah.
made you choose to bring them in?
Oh man, so many things. I mean, part of it is that we sort of set ourselves up because we spend so much time with them. I mean, multiple hours a day when they were chicks, and then always an hour a day minimum, of visit time midday. Quite literally for each flock. Yeah. Quite literally, they have never gone a day in their lives without their daily visit time.
Like, we've never left the house together overnight since we got the chickens.
You're right. Everything revolves around them at this point, so they're very, very happy to be interacted with. They really want us around all the time. And we started seeing on the monitor, the boys not only would line up at the fence every time it was time for visits, just waiting, just staring and waiting for us all in a row. And then eventually crowing for us if we were running late. But then, we'd leave and they'd all line up again at the fence and they would just look, so longingly at the door, and meanwhile, we have all of our other pets inside being there with us all the time. We were seeing them struggle through, the cold winters and the wind and the snow and the super hot summers where we're comfortable in our air conditioning. And it just kind of felt like, we have few enough and we have set this precedent now of them being a very close and involved part of the family. And they just deserve to have that same luxury, as any of our other pets would.
Luxury and the protection too. It's an added bonus, that they don't have to worry about any of the dangers of the outside. She mentioned weather, but obviously predators are a part of that too. And they still do the alarm call when they see something out of the window, but it is a night and day difference. Their feeling of or their, at least what we perceive to be their feeling of security. They calmed, all of them, the boys and the girls, calmed down so much when they came inside. They just felt so secure, like, oh, it's so peaceful.
I was
in here.
going to ask, like behavior changes. What did you see?
Well, they think everything in our hand is food now, for sure. Absolutely, definitely. So yeah, definitely more expectation, of those kinds of interactions. And
at the same time, in a weird way, kind of less. So now with them living indoors all the time, I mean, they go outside. We have 2 enclosed runs that we built. So when it's nice out, they can go out and enjoy the dirt and get their bugs and sunshine and all of that. But they spend most of the time inside, and therefore, we don't have to do that daily routine of spend an hour with them and that's their visit time. We're coming and going. We see them hundreds of times a day, maybe for less time, but we're so consistent that they don't do that thing where they're like longing for us to return. We've left.
They do get bored though, even now, even with the much less outside time that they usually have, especially having just gone through winter, we'll have them out there for maybe an hour and then we look on the monitor because we can still have the security monitors. And they're all just kind of waiting by the door and we're like, okay, I guess let's get our diapers on and come back in because they're done with the outside. They want to come back into the living room.
You create this vision of a little doggy door in the run and like them going in and out.
That was the plan initially. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I have to be fair, our boy Daisy was actually a big motivation for moving them in, or at least giving them the opportunity to be, because oh my gosh, he loves being inside. It's like he just wanted to be a house rooster from almost day one. He had an injury where he got damage to his wattle. We think one of his brothers maybe grabbed it and then he fell off the roost and it like tore. And so he had to stay inside overnight. We took him to the vet the next morning to have it checked out. And he just, that one time, the very next day we went out to greet them, he pushes right past our legs out the gate and just makes a beeline for the front door. Like the second time that he hurt himself and had to come in, we went to escort him to the bedroom where his kennel was. He walks into the bedroom, jumps straight onto the bed like he owns the place. Like But oh my gosh, yeah, every time that he would go out to visit them, if Daisy would slip out, I would come to join him, and I'd see Daisy stand on the steps by the sliding door just looking in. So yeah, I hated to leave him out there. I hated to say, nope, you have to be in the yard, so.
Well, going back to one of the earliest parts of this, like any animal, once they've secured resources and safety, they seek comfort, right? And if they've got a choice between two types of comfort and one is clearly more comfortable, they're going to prefer it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So
well, we wanted them to have the choice. We wanted them to have the same kind of flexibility as much as possible that we do.
we do the same thing for our dogs and
nice
cats, and if the dog gets to live inside and go outside when they want to, then the chicken should as well.
Well, and we were inspired too that they would be able to tell us, because when Sunshine was having to live inside with her health issues, she learned very quickly not only what time we went out for outside visits with the flock, because she would get short ones, as much as she could handle from day to day with supervision. And same time every day. All of the representatives I spoke to at the insurance companies with my job at the time knew her, and they'd hear her in the background, they'd go, is it time to go out? I'm like, almost. But she knew she'd go straight to that door and she'd wait. And she also knew how to step up on an arm on command. So if I held out my forearm for her and just offered, at first I had to tap her wing and say, step up. But eventually it was literally just the forearm, and she would climb right on. She knew we were going out to the yard. And then out in the run, she knew that an offer of an arm was bringing her in. So what she would do is, if she wanted to come in, she'd climb on like usual. If she didn't, she'd very slowly approach, very slowly lift her foot like she was going to step up, and then hop over and trot off at the last instant. So I puzzled my son so much one day when I was sitting there kind of thinking to myself, well, does Sunshine want to stay out, or does she want to come in? I don't know. She seems like she's having fun, but we've been out a while. I'm going through this in my head. He's on his cell phone, in the run at the time, fairly distracted. And at one point I just said, oh, well, I guess I'll just ask her when we go in. And he looks up at me like, what did you just say? I'm like, oh, yeah, no, you can ask her and she'll tell you. So she knew that an arm at night took her to bed, and, all of these things. So
Wow.
she picked up on that pattern. So it was like, depending on the time of day and the location, she knew what she was being offered and could very clearly communicate what she wanted. So we figured as long as they can learn that, how to ask to go out when they want to go out and ask to come in when they want to come in, then we can navigate this pretty well, and they can actually call those shots themselves.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And I mean, it shows, the time you clearly spend a lot more time observing and with your flock than the average person. So, so I mean, there's so much to learn from that, from just observing. We live in a society that nobody sits still anymore. Nobody sits and, just enjoys nature, what's around outside.
Right.
And, and so just talking with you, like it inspires to, like, I want to watch them more and, and do that, because I mean, I know they're smart, and, and I mean, I love watching them. It's like my meditation thing of just, I have a bench in front of both of my two runs. They're side by side, and I sit on the nice days, I sit out there, or I just go in the run too, but I like to sit outside where I can just watch them do their thing without me distracting them too, of being in there. But
for sure.
But I mean, that is so cool.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and you said it great too, like the amount of time one spends with them, like, sort of illuminates the possibility or the potential of what they can develop into. So, like, not everybody's going to want to, or even necessarily have the freedom to spend as much time as we have with them, but at least what it shows is that the potential is there. Like, so the only limitation to, what you can get out of the relationship with a chicken is, what you put into it. time and involvement and, observation.
Just like
They're-
any relationship,
just like
really.
any.
Yeah.
Well, and it
I
brings
just-
me back. Actually, I was going to mention a little bit ago on the topic of, letting them win and being the boss and all of this. That people misunderstand that so badly because it's just showing consideration and care to respond to their cues. It's not letting them win. They're not trying
Right.
to compete. They just want to feel comfortable. So it'd be a lot like if your spouse said, "Hey, it really scares me when you go, out of town and you don't call and check in," and going, "Well, I'm not going to do that. I'll be letting him win."
Yeah.
We would never do that. It's ridiculous.
Right.
So yeah, nobody should be afraid to respond,
Yeah.
in a caring way to those requests and cues. It's not going to be taken advantage of in any way.
And I don't think people have that patience. Like they don't see like chickens in that same, way. Like my sister had a feral cat that just showed up on her property. It took her almost 2 years to make friends with that
Wow.
cat. And I mean, at first the cat was like way in the distance, always watching her, and would follow her, but follow like slinking around, like where she thought like my sister couldn't see her, and she would watch. And then finally she would start to come closer and closer. And she actually had some kittens, and my sister had to, she saved, it was pouring rain and the kittens were in the mud. And so she saved the kittens. And then as the mother cat, but it took 2 years. Like now she sits on my sister's lap and but it took her 2 years, and they talk. It's so funny. My sister, and I remember she'd send me videos and FaceTime me to show, she called her magic because she would just appear and disappear. And, and so, but she just, but she put the 2 years in. And so I don't think people realize the reward that you can get from your chickens and your roosters.
Exactly.
That, by putting that little bit of, I don't think they even think that. And that's part of, again, why, I love what you're doing. And I love even talking with you because, you show a different side of things that, people just, I don't think they even think about. I just don't think they associate it.
Well,
or they think it's not achievable for them.
Yeah.
We see so many viral videos of an animal, a wild animal or an exotic species that, wouldn't be a normal pet, being so bonded to a human. These videos on the dodo and geobeats and these big channels, get millions and millions of views. But I'm sure the viewers just think, oh, well, that's a unique case. That's an exception.
Presented as remarkable.
Yeah. But really, we can all achieve that. Even with wild animals, and going back to what you're saying, it's the reward or the satisfaction or the greater reward comes from a greater investment or, even a greater challenge. The more you have to work at something, the more you're going to appreciate the results. And that applies to developing a friendship with any animal.
Definitely. Although by way of reassurance, because we have spent an immense amount of time, way more than most people would be able to with our birds, we've just been very lucky to have that flexibility. But that's why we hope to, kind of create a bridge, because you don't have to spend nearly that much time to bond and to achieve these things. You might need to spend it to find the things and identify them in the first place. But if we've done that already, then we can share, those puzzle pieces, and then keepers only have to keep up with that routine and that time together and know what these things mean and what's possible. So it greatly expedites the process. It's just one person who needs to figure it out or make it known, and then everyone else can still benefit. So nobody should feel like they have to spend 8 hours a day, Jane Goodall, living in their chicken run to bond. Definitely not necessary. So
if you can do it, it's awesome.
Yes.
But
I have seen people set up sleeping bags, and it was people with new chicks, and they were afraid when the chicks transitioned outside.
Yeah,
and they
putting up a
sleep
cot or
in the run
Great.
with them. But what from your personal experiences, what would you say? What was the most rewarding situation? And I'm sure you've had many, but is there anything that in particular that stands out above everything else?
Um, yeah, that's it. There are just so many. I know Sarah has one in particular.
Yeah.
I was there for that too, but she gets the credit for that one.
So
So
this is Daisy again, my sweet Daisy, who I should probably share, decided we are just absolute best buddies after he was, for a short time, the only one allowed to come into the coop with me to scoop their sand, because he at the time was the only one who was not biting hands and trying to mate them. But he decided, we're tight now, we're very close, and it's been kind of that way ever since. And so this was one of his vet trips. This might have been when he broke off his spur. I want to say he kicked his own spur off. And so we took him to the vet, and he's very, very tame. He's very easy to handle. He's very laid back, actually. And he was doing fantastic, just riding in a lap on a lap in the car on the way to the vet. And we had planned, rather than try to force him into this carrier he was obviously afraid of, to just let him ride on an arm like he was used to carry him into the clinic. Now, what we had not accounted for, and the reason we would no longer ever recommend that anyone try this, is because the vet tech, in an attempt to help, opened that door. He was not expecting this, saw something coming towards him, and he jumped down and darted about halfway across the parking lot. Now, as all this is happening, I'm still back at the car, trying to get his stuff together, his records, his snacks.
I was carrying him in. He jumped off of my arm.
Well, and so I see him, and he's doing that stereotypical chicken thing where he is bolt upright, wide-eyed, and he's just looking, completely frantic, one direction to the other, doesn't seem to be aware, of time and place, really. He's just looking to flee. And the further problem was that this clinic was right alongside a main road, just gravel sidewalk road. So I'm thinking he's going to run into traffic, or he's going to run off into the wilderness on the other side, and we're never going to see him again. And I just dropped to one knee and I went, Daisy, Daisy. And finally he looks over and he makes eye contact, and I patted my leg and I went, "Brrr," and he just made a beeline, ran straight to my knees. The vet tech is standing there, I'm sure, thinking, what did I just watch? At that point, I joke that he's the only one who has actually chosen to be with us, because he had the opportunity to leave and he came back to mommy and papa.
You gave me chills. That's just I got chills from that. No, wow.
Yeah. We like to think all of them would choose us, but he's the only one who's actually gotten to test that theory.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That is.
Yeah. He was an amazing boy. So sweet.
Yeah. I guess I'll throw one out there too. I think, and it ties into some things we talked about earlier as well. One of our boys, Ginger, was, I would say, particularly enthusiastic about the mating attempts during puberty, and very bitey to expose skin, hands, feet, but he was also a shoulder bird. From the time he could get on a shoulder and stay there safely as a chick, that's where he wanted to be. And when he started getting bitey, that dropped off a little bit. I didn't want eyes getting pecked, and so he kind of just seemed bummed out, that he didn't get shoulder time anymore. And one day I just decided to bite the bullet, and if I get pecked, I get pecked. And I let him get up on my shoulder, and he did, he looked curiously around, and I did get pecked a couple times, but I told him as soon as it happened, ouch. Ow, no, that hurts. And it only took a time or two, and of me just okay, eyes closed, you do what you're going to do. I trust you, I've let you know that I don't like that hurts. And he never did it again.
Wow.
He'd be on my shoulder, and, he'd look at my eyeball, and I'd be like, and he'd just go back to chilling. And it's so cool to not only just develop a trusting relationship, but also to witness their, I guess, caring and compassion. He obviously had to care about my discomfort in order to choose not to, follow through on an impulse like that.
They're very considerate. He followed that up actually. Once he realized that the bites for the mating attempts hurt us,
Yes,
he followed up by switching from trying to bite our hand when he was on our lap to biting his own toe. He holds on to himself, which more than once has caused him to fall off of a lap trying to do his little tangles. But yeah, that he just insisted on that. It's like, and you try, like after seeing this happen enough times, we're like, here, just go ahead. You can
Use
have
the
the hand. He won't do it. He just absolutely refuses.
Oh, that's
to have
funny.
his toe or his plush toy.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah. I hope you can find somebody who can help you with as far as research and documentation, because you have so many like just unbelievable stories, and and you've built a relationship with your roosters and your hens with the flock that people don't quite have that, and you're being able to like utilize that in different ways to take it beyond what the ordinary relationship, but to really test like and see actual responses that if you're in a research lab, they're not really going to have that same relationship with their animal.
Exactly.
And there's an immersion with yours that can really document the true depth versus in some
they can really be
cold-
themselves.
Well, and you
For
can
sure.
see so much more really, living alongside them, and making yourself such a constant presence in the flock. So that's definitely helped. They're much more comfortable showing us things. Like we joke, people always say that chickens will hide their pain, but it's like ours will complain at the most minor thing for the most part. Just I think because they know they're safe. That's a protective instinct to not be targeted, but they're just so secure that it's like, they don't really bother with that.
And you can see the security, the comfort, just the way she's sitting there, just.
She's the huggiest thing. The moment that we sit down on the floor, she comes right up and does a little dig at the knee, like, hold me.
So, okay, this is going to be our last question. This has been fantastic. But what advice would you give somebody who was considering getting a rooster? And so what are some things initially that they can they need to think about? Because it really is something. It's important, and some people will take it seriously. Other people are just, well, if I get it, I can get rid of it. But what are some things that you would advice you would give somebody considering getting one?
Oh my, there's so much. I think we talked about a lot of it too, but don't fall for the common information. Change your expectations from dumb chicken to extremely smart, extremely affectionate, emotional companion animal, at least as far as potential goes. Depending on what somebody wants out of the relationship, they might be okay with less than the potential, but I would definitely go into it understanding that the more you observe and the more time you spend with them, the more you're going to be just blown away and amazed and in love. I mean, like, they're like our children, they're just so incredible, and it's so unexpected because of the majority of information that's currently out there. So don't believe it. Roosters, chickens in general, they're absolutely amazing, affectionate, bonded creatures that want nothing but love, and they can complete your life.
Well, you really do get what you expect. If you go into it expecting that there won't be anything remarkable to be achieved, then you're not going to see those opportunities, and you're not going to go after them. So it's really important to set the bar high. Shoot for the moon. Don't let anyone tell you that it has to be mediocre or disappointing relationship in any way. And of course, if getting young roosters, like if you're going to be raising a male chick, lots of early bonding, lots of time spent and opportunity to establish that bond and that trust. Also bracing for puberty and for spring, because it will happen. And the level of reactivity can change, from boy to boy, but there will be some turbulence. And spring, a lot of people say that by a year old, you're seeing their real personality. Completely misleading, because right about spring, they're hitting their first mature breeding season. So keepers will see them start to kind of calm down and the behavior improves and they think, oh, we're getting a handle on it. And then it worsens and they go, oh, I've failed. But it's just that second rocky patch before they really, truly do start settling. So don't be fooled by that. And if bringing in an older boy who was raised by someone else, get that good background, try to figure out if there's been any past trauma. And know that whoever you're getting them from, unless they're very, very close with you, they may not tell you the truth. So even if they say, oh, no, he's never been hit or kicked, you don't know if a visitor might have. You don't know if they might just be absolutely misrepresenting his upbringing because they feel guilty or embarrassed, or heaven only knows. So with any boy that you do not know the entirety of their history, assume worse than better, because it's much more common for roosters have been exposed to mistreatment than not. And let that guide you, if they seem to be reacting irrationally to something, consider that something in their past might be at play there, and just kind of keep an open mind about it. But really, just patience, openness, remembering that they, like any other living being, are going to have their tough days where they're not feeling well, or they're just anxious, they're in a bad mood, they slept poorly, maybe the hens have been arguing all day and driving them crazy. But as long as you stick by them, treat it like any other relationship, and show that trustworthiness and empathy and patience, then things will be absolutely remarkable. And anything more complicated than that, toss us a line. We'd love to help in any situation. So, yeah.
That sounds fantastic. So is there anything that I missed that you wanted to add? I think we've covered a whole lot of information, but anything I missed?
Well, I think that's about it. I would give our email, but I think we're going to have the links below. So you can find all the different ways to connect with us there. And just really always so thrilled to help, always thrilled to chat, and never, any kind of charge for that. So definitely don't ever feel hesitant to reach out. There are no questions too small. And we just want to see people have the kind of relationship with their birds that we've been able to, because it truly is the most special thing,
Changed our lives.
Thank you both so much. I really, really appreciate everything.
Of course, thank you.
I have loved
thank you
speaking
so
with you. So, so hold on. I'm just going to end the recording, and then hold on.